Old Parasite, a mother loses everything in her own home. The old parasite. What is she doing here? There's no place for you in this house. Jessica, my daughter-in-law, blocked the porch of the Malibu beach home I had spent a lifetime sweating to build. Eleanor, 70 years old, clenched the key ring in my hand. The keys that once opened every door of my life suddenly felt useless cold metal against a trembling palm. Before me was a scene I could not accept. The apron I had painstakingly embroidered hung around Jessica's neck. Wet towels were piled on the rattan set I'd just bought. The kids cheered as they kicked a ball that shattered the geranium pot I'd cherished for years. The smells of cigarette smoke, cheap perfume, and salty ocean air tangled together until my chest tightened. I kept my voice steady, letting each word fall slowly. This is my house. Jessica's lip curled. It's not yours anymore. I didn't answer. Instead, I looked past her toward the blue, endless sea, the witness to more than 20 years of my labor, and told myself I'm taking it all back. The road into Malibu has never felt strange to me. For more than 2 decades, every bend along the coast, every palm frond swaying in the wind felt like a companion. My little car used to stop at the driveway of the beach house where I had planted every shrub with my own hands and painted every patch of wall after my husband died. What used to be a scrubby lot became a refuge, a testament to a widowed seamstress who saved every dollar to build a dream. But that morning, I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto the familiar street. Strange cars filled the garage. Music boomed from the porch noise that crashed against the quiet I had protected for years. I stepped out, my palms damp and cold. The sight hit me like a blow. The lawn trampled, beer cans rolling, rattan chairs heaped with damp clothes, children shrieking as they ran, dirty shoes stamping every stair. Each detail sliced into my memories of a place that had once been serene and full of meaning. I moved slowly toward the front door, my hand tightening around the keys. At that instant, Jessica appeared, brazen as if this were her domain. She wore the apron I'd stitched late into so many nights. Her eyes were cool. Her voice the same cutting tone as before. It's not yours anymore. I stood still, surrounded by strangers clustering behind my daughter-in-law. They looked at me like an intruder. In that moment, I felt I'd lost not only my house but my standing in my own family. Yet instead of collapsing, something fierce rose in me. I gave a small smile, one that didn't reach my eyes, and turned away. They thought they had won. They had no idea that in that moment I had begun to fight back. The gate I paid for. I turned my back on the porch like a guest politely shown out, yet my feet still remembered every paver I'd bought with midnight hours at the sewing machine. The deep green iron gate, once scrubbed of rust and painted by my own hands, 3 careful coats, was cool beneath my palm. I didn't argue with Jessica in the middle of that laughing crowd. I unlatched the gate, stepped through, and let the wind and the surf sweep the stale, muddled smell from my chest. The hotel was 5 minutes from the house. The front desk girl handed me a key and asked if I was all right. For now, I said, and heard my voice age. In the room, I flung the balcony doors wide to let the wind rush in, washed my face for a long, steady minute, then looked straight at the 70-year-old woman in the mirror eyes, still holding enough fire to warm an entire home. I called Robert. It's Mom. On the other end, office breath, fast and shallow. I thought you were in Chicago. We just came down to the beach house for the weekend. Mom, stay at the hotel and I'll sort it out. Sorted out, 2 words like a damp cloth dragged across my face. I hung up before anger could boil over because I needed a cool head to remember every detail. By late afternoon, I went back. Veronica opened the door. Don't make noise. Jessica's sleeping and pointed at plastic bags stuffed with my things as if they were trash. The living room was a sprawl of blow-up mattresses, clothes, and beer cans. I walked past a child kicking a ball into the wall. It ricocheted into the geranium pot, and a single red petal fell like a bead of blood. The kitchen reeked of burnt grease. The sink brimmed with dishes. I opened a cabinet for the white china with blue rims, the set I'd bought one piece at a time every Christmas, and the empty space flashed like a pulled tooth. Only broke a few. They're kids. Veronica shrugged. Children aren't at fault, I thought. Grown-ups who let them break things are. I went upstairs. Jessica's mother was stuffing my clothes into plastic bags. Two unfamiliar boys slept hard on my bed, sweat staining the pillows. I walked straight to the wardrobe and the hidden compartment behind it. The small door was ajar, papers ransacked. I gathered each sheet and found a stack bearing Robert's and Jessica's names, a petition to transfer the house because of incompetence due to age-related dementia. Beneath it, an appraisal, $300,000, and scrawled in her hand, "Sell it enough for renovations and private school for the kids." My heart pitched, then steadied like a needle catching the right loop. I slipped the entire stack into my bag, closed the panel, and listened. Out on the balcony, Jessica's voice carried crisp as glass. "It's fine, Mom. The lawyer says it's easy. Robert's an only child. She's old. We've got the medical forms, $50, and a signature. Yeah, keep her at the hotel. Don't let her in." I didn't open the door. I stepped back and left the room like a shadow. I had what I needed. Back at the hotel, I spread the papers across the desk the way you spread fabric before the cut. Years in the trade taught me to see a crooked seam at a glance. Now I could see every raised ridge of deceit in these lines of text. I called the bank. Mr. Davis lock out all third-party access and issue a letter immediately confirming I manage my finances independently. He understood at once and set an appointment for morning. I left Robert a message. I have proof. Don't force me to do what you won't want. It wasn't a threat. It was notice. In the morning, Mr. Davis handed me an envelope, 15 years of account history, a letter affirming my capacity, and the name of a lawyer, Thomas Grant. I thanked him and held the envelope like a crossbeam on a trembling bridge. Thomas's office smelled of clean wood fountain pen whispering over paper. "Tell me everything," he said. I told him about the beer cans, the embroidered apron, the missing china, the hidden compartment, the strange stack of forms the balcony call. He nodded, notes, neat and spare. 4 actions first thing tomorrow, he said evenly. Emergency eviction for unlawful occupation, report of stolen property, request to investigate forged medical documents, and an order barring any transaction in your name. He looked up. "Are you prepared to see this through?" I didn't hesitate. I've come this far. By afternoon, I had the file reordered, the confirmation letter clipped on top, and a list in my hand. 8R0 house. Police, notary, lawyer. I called my sister Laura in Phoenix. She sighed. "Do what you need to do. I'm far, but I'm with you." I smiled. That night, I wrote a letter to myself. Don't love your child so much that you forget justice. Justice protects those who know how to love. I folded it and slipped it into the cloth-bound notebook. Before dawn, I dressed in my gray suit and fastened my husband's gold watch. The hill up to the house still slanted the same way with that bruised stain in the concrete. I parked tight to the curb. Down the road, Thomas's black sedan and a patrol car were climbing. I set my hand on my deep green iron gate. The coolness steadied me. Inside, voices carried with the careless cheer of a picnic that had gone on too long. They didn't know this morning was a different kind of sunrise. I pushed the gate and stepped into the yard, the case heavy but sure in my hand, ready for the needle's first plunge. The story had changed tempo. An eviction order, 2 hours to clear out, and the confrontation no one could avoid. Sometimes paper cuts draw blood at 5 to 8. I stood on the front steps. The door opened. Jessica still held a coffee cup. Veronica raised her phone to record. Jessica's mother wore my robe. Their slack faces tightened the instant they saw the officers behind Thomas. "Good morning," Thomas said, calm as ever. "I represent Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the legal owner of this home. We're here with an emergency eviction order for unlawful occupancy. The officer nodded and read the charges one by one: trespass, property damage, unlawful occupation, suspected theft. No one was laughing now. You can't do this. Jessica dropped her cup. Veronica lowered her phone, halfway color draining. Jessica's mother froze in my fuzzy slippers. The officer continued. You have 2 hours to pack personal items. Anything belonging to Mrs. Vance stays as is. I'll supervise. After 2 hours, anyone remaining will be detained. Children started crying. A boy, eyes red, tugged at my hand. Why are you kicking us out? We didn't do anything. My heart dipped. I knelt to meet him eye to eye. I'm not kicking you out, sweetheart. I'm taking back my home. The grown-ups were wrong to bring you here without permission. Jessica lunged, yanking her son's hand. Don't talk to my child. Thomas stepped in, voice steady. All ageist insults and intimidation are being added to a separate elder abuse file. Jessica bit her lip and backed off, eyes sparking. 2 hours. The wall clock seemed to sprint. The yard turned into a frantic loading dock, overstuffed trash bags, suitcases slamming shut. In the chaos, I stood like a survey stake, arms around my case. I knew every belonging of mine by heart: the wool scarf my mother knit, the watch my father gave me on my wedding day, and I knew they weren't in those heaps. 30 minutes later, an engine I knew swung into the drive. Robert. His face had gone ash, his eyes flicking to the police cruiser's plates. What is this? He rasped. Thomas handed him a summons for complicity in an attempted unlawful transfer. I opened my case at the stack I'd found on the table. The papers you plan to sign, I said softly. Robert bent and his shoulders fell. Mom, I can explain. I shook my head. There's nothing left to explain. Jessica pulled him aside, whispering gasoline onto the flame. He came back, rumpled. Mom, we can handle this privately. Don't make it a scene. I held his gaze. What does handle mean? I keep my house, you return my things, and I withdraw the filings. What about the forged medical papers? What about calling me a parasite? He swallowed. I just wanted to take care of my family. You live alone. The house is big. It's wasteful. Wasteful hit the stones like a pebble on water, sending out cold rings. Wasteful, I repeated slow enough for him to hear every edge. Was it wasteful when I stitched until my fingers split to buy each tile, or when I tended a plant for 20 years and watched it bloom? Robert raked a hand through his hair. I can't stand that every time we need help, I hear about the sacrifices. I want to stand on my own. By taking your mother's house. My voice didn't rise, but I saw Jessica and Veronica exchange a look. Robert whispered, I was wrong. I didn't answer. Wrong is a small word. Consequences aren't. A little girl, Sophia, stood by the steps, hugging a doll, fear wide in her eyes. I turned to her. Tell your mom not to take anything that belongs to me, okay? She nodded and hurried inside as if running from a cold gust. 1 hour left. Everything sped up. Jessica's mother sagged onto the stairs out of breath. Jessica, dijiste que había papeles. Que ella estuvo de acuerdo. Porque así don't, Mom, Jessica snapped. Veronica, phone in hand, shot at me. You won. Happy now I stayed even. I'm taking back what's mine. Winning and losing, those are between you and your conscience. The last 40 minutes were a racket of crying kids, zippers, and banging suitcases. Robert carried things in silence, avoiding my eyes. With 10 minutes left, he came over. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't have anything else. I looked at my son, the 45-year-old man who'd once been the gap-toothed boy grinning from the photo on the living room shelf. I understood suddenly some trees are bent early. By the time you notice the curve is part of the grain. I spoke slowly. I hope one day you'll be sorry because you understand, not because you're afraid. Time. The officer did a final walkthrough. Please leave the property. Veronica flung a bag, eyes wet. Jessica's mother muttered curses under her breath. Jessica lowered her car window and screamed, "You'll regret this. We'll sue you into the ground. You're a cruel old woman." I stood on the step with my hand on the white-painted post. "See you in court." I said no. Spite. No shake. The cars pulled away. The garage fell suddenly quiet. Late sun spilled onto the patio in gold panes, revealing rings left by beer cans. Thomas placed the keys in my hand. "Mrs. Vance, control of your property is restored." I received them like a familiar heartbeat. The officer saluted, adding, "File all theft and damage claims through us. We'll coordinate." The notary closed the folder. The dry click sounded like a period. I stepped into the living room. The air still carried sweat and cheap softener. On the rattan chair lay the apron I embroidered, crumpled. I picked it up, smoothed it, folded it. My eyes moved over wine stains on the needle-worked cushion, a scratch across the table, a shoe mark on the threshold. A to-do list formed in my head. Clean change, the locks inventory call, a deep clean crew, check the hidden compartment again, account for every keepsake. Thomas spoke quietly. "Tomorrow, I'll file on the forged medical documents and seek the injunction. I'll update you on any moves from their side." I nodded. "Thank you." He looked at me the way you look at a soldier lowering her shield. "You're stronger than they thought." When everyone left, the house felt wider than necessary. I sat on the sun-dried rattan and looked straight out to sea. The waves kept folding onto the shore, as they always have, indifferent to human dramas, patient even. I set the keys on the table, laid my hand over them, and felt my pulse slow and even out. I haven't won. I've only won back the door. Ahead lie forged medical forms, missing jewelry, statements to file, and that empty space between a mother and her son that needs a name. But I have crossed a threshold, the threshold of fear, humiliation, and the habit of keeping the peace. At 70, I relearned an old lesson: they can call you a parasite, but no one can throw you out of your own dignity unless you walk yourself out. I went to the kitchen, and ran water over the apron. The stream slipped through the fabric, rinsing away a stranger's scent. I hung it up, and the final drop fell into the sink like a comma. The story wasn't over. There was another chapter to write: scrub every stain, change every lock list, every loss. When the glass door slid shut, I could hear the ocean more clearly. I knew tomorrow would be a day of lists, invoices, phone calls, and a new quiet. A quiet I claimed back for myself. Clean up, the damage ledger, and the price of justice beginning to show. When the door closed, the inventory of what remained. When the door shut behind the last of them, I stood in the living room and listened to the quiet roll in like a tide. Quiet has a smell too damp: fabric, stale wine, the sweat rising from air mattresses, and cigarette smoke snagged in the curtains. I threw open every window, drew the curtains wide, and let the ocean wind comb through the house like a large hand smoothing back hair blown wild by a storm. I took a hardbound notebook and wrote on the first page, inventory date. I divided it into sections: living room, kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, garden. Under each, I listed item after item, breathing slow so feeling wouldn't flood the words. Living room: embroidered cushion stained with wine, a long scratch across the wood table, rattan chair fibers fraying. Kitchen: 2 French pans burned on the bottom, a cooktop filmed with black grease, a sink holding the sour of standing water. Bathroom: porcelain tub, dark dye streaks stubborn to lift. Bedroom: dirty sheets, pillows holding a stranger's scent, wardrobe rifled. Documents in the hidden compartment already secured. Garden: half a geranium bed snapped, soil churned with shoe prints. I photographed each detail, numbered them, and matched them to the notes. I called a professional cleaning service and booked a deep clean 5-people full day. The quote made me frown for a heartbeat, but I nodded. Come this afternoon, the sooner the better. I called a locksmith. Replace every cylinder and add a secondary bolt on the back door. He asked, how many key sets? 3, I said. 1 for me, 1 temporarily for my attorney, 1 spare kept at the bank. Then I phoned a camera installer. The technician scheduled a site check for the next day. "I want coverage of the entry porch, garage, and hallway," I said. "Nothing fancy, reliable." The cleaners arrived, wheels crunching over gravel. In blue shirts and gloves, they split up one room each. The sounds of bristle brushes, steam, and wrung-out cloths blended into a working music that soothed me. I stood in the doorway and gave gentle instructions. Hand wash the embroidery. Start the tub with a mild cream cleanser. Use the strong stuff only if it won't come up. With each sentence, it felt as if the house moved from strangers' hands back into mine. What couldn't be saved, I gathered into a corner marked discard and took more photos. Midway through, I opened the small cupboard where I'd kept keepsakes. The wedding day wall clock my father gave me was gone. I stood a long time staring at the empty square on the wall, mouth dry. On the shelf, the family photo album had vanished, a thick, cloth-bound book of every moment from Robert's gap-toothed years, now only a dust print. I added 2 lines to the notebook. My hand trembled. Some losses don't fit under property. They belong to memory. But a report still needs to be complete. The law can't process emotion without a clear ledger. While the team worked, I walked the fence line and righted the geraniums that had survived. Each remaining red bloom lightened me a little proof that not everything breaks. The neighbor across the way peered from behind her shade. I waved first so she'd know I had nothing to hide. She nodded, embarrassed, then stepped out. "Mrs. Eleanor." I heard the commotion and worried. "It's all right," I said. "Just a very large mistake." She looked in, frowned. "If you ever need someone to keep an eye on the place." "Thank you," I said. "I'll consider it." By late day, the crew finished. The house smelled of mild soap. The window glass was so clear it caught the streak of sunset like a mirror. I paid tipped extra and asked them to hold a recurring slot for the next few weeks. The locksmith arrived, tightened screws, swapped cores, and cut keys on my dining table. The crisp click of a new lock was like a heart transplant for a door. I tried it, smooth, decisive. I signed the receipt and slipped 1 key set into a small envelope labeled "Spare Bank." When the last person left, I put water on to boil, poured tea, and set the cup on an old woven coaster my husband had once bought at a flea market. Each warm sip filled the hollow in my chest. I opened the notebook and checked the lists. Long but ordered reports: stolen jewelry, vintage watch, pearl earrings. A few silver coins report the missing album, and wall clocks seek compensation for damages. I closed the book and drew out the envelope marked "Will." I hadn't revised it in nearly 7 years. My pen paused at Robert's name, not out of hatred, but a late-coming clarity. I didn't write tonight. But for the first time, I seriously considered other names. I tidied lightly, changed the sheets, set the duvet and pillows spinning in the washer. The drum's steady whir sounded like a heart newly at rest. Before bed, I stood on the porch and looked down at the beach. The water was black silk. The moon's silver laid long, the waves like broad stitches pulling back and forth. I wondered how many women reach 70 before they learn to say no, not to the world, but to the habit of enduring. That night, I slept. Not deep, but without dreams. In the morning, I rose early, wiped down the table, and opened my planner. Before noon, I would file a theft report at the police station, go with Thomas to the health department to lodge a complaint against the doctor, then on to the courthouse to submit for a restraining order on transactions. A day of paperwork and seals. Strangely, I felt lighter. Perhaps because at last the tangle was becoming a list I could cross off. Before I closed the planner, I wrote a single line to title the day: "Justice begins in small things." A new lock, a stain scrubbed clean, a clear list. I capped my pen, took the case, and locked the door. The door now turned on silent hinges like a nod. I reached the station while the sun was still gentle. The public counter smelled of fresh ink and coffee. The desk officer looked up, a middle-aged man with tired eyes that weren't unkind. "I'd like to file a theft report," I said, setting my case on the counter. I took out each photo and each page from the inventory and laid them out in order. He nodded, typed, asked short questions, model, serial number, estimated value, supporting proof. The vintage watch is insured, I said, passing over the policy copy. He nodded again, his face shifting into a fully professional cast. Your documentation is excellent, he said. We'll open an investigation. If we recover items, we'll contact you immediately. Do you have named suspects? I kept my eyes on the page. I have names. From the station, I met Thomas at the State Health Department. Down a long hallway hung a placard, professional conduct complaints. We sat with a woman whose gray hair framed a face trained by years of careful note-taking. Thomas set a copy of the falsified medical report and my statement in front of her. This doctor never examined my client, he said. There's payment notation on the back. We request an urgent investigation. The woman studied the blurred seal and underlined a few lines. A panel will review. The process may take several weeks. We understand, Thomas said evenly. We'll also forward copies to the DA's office. I watched them speak, feeling as if I were watching a torn seam being stitched, steady, exact few words. At noon, we went to court. The filing room was full of people holding cases like mine, eyes worn thin. Thomas walked straight to the counter and filed for a temporary restraining order, barring anyone from using my name in transactions, from accessing the property, from harassment. The clerk flipped briskly through the packet and stamped received. There's a duty judge this afternoon, she said. If there's basis, the order will be effective immediately. Thomas glanced at me. We wait. Waiting is a craft I learned as a seamstress, wading through fittings, through the needles, pass through the settling of the thread. On a row of plastic chairs, I sat among strangers. An elderly woman clutched a thick envelope, murmuring to herself. A young man in a wrinkled shirt checked his watch again and again. We shared one thing, faith in a red seal. Mid-afternoon we were called. A temporary courtroom at the end of the hall. A silver-haired judge with glasses low on his nose. Thomas was brief and straight. Title: proof of unlawful occupancy. The transfer scheme using a falsified medical note. Risk of recurrence. I spoke a single sentence when asked. I am fully lucid and I have a letter from my bank confirming my independent management. The judge read the letter, nodded, and tapped the gavel once. Temporary order granted for 30 days, renewable. I exhaled as if for the first time all day I'd had enough air. Outside, Thomas handed me a copy. Keep this in your wallet, he said. If anyone tries to come back, call the police immediately. I nodded. I'll roll today's fees together. He added, practical as ever. I understood and wrote the agreed amount on a check. I hadn't spent this much money in so few days in my life, yet each amount felt like a screw, tightened in the right place, giving back stability. That evening, I returned home, dried the embroidered cushions, and set them to air on the porch. Sunlight clung to the fabric and tugged me out of heavy thoughts. I made a light soup and ate slowly. The phone buzzed, an unknown number. I let it be. A text arrived. Ma'am, it's Veronica. Please pick up. I watched the screen for a long moment, then set the phone face down. Not tonight. The next day, I followed Thomas to the district attorney's office. Intake was quiet, white-lit stacks of files rising like city blocks. The deputy read the narrative and pressed for precise timelines. Thomas added printouts of Veronica's social post, bragging about a new beach house, the porch in my background. The deputy's brows lifted, his pen quickened. We'll consider opening a case for asset fraud and conspiracy, he said. I thanked him. I wasn't jubilant. I felt a stone rolling into the right groove. A week passed, the way you clear a long room one corner a day. The house grew cleaner. The odd smells thinned, the new locks slid smooth. The cameras were up, and my phone showed 3 green dots. I set an automatic watering schedule and arranged check-ins for days I'd be away. Each receipt went into the binder tagged. While folding towels, I found an old photo that had fallen behind the dresser. Robert at 8, sitting in the sand, grinning through missing teeth. I sat on the bed with my hand on the frame. A mother's love is a strong thread, but some stitches have been pulled loose. Mending them takes time and sometimes a different stitch entirely. On Friday afternoon, Thomas called. "There's news," he said, unable to hide a professional satisfaction. "The doctor who signed the form has been suspended pending investigation. The DA has formally opened a case for asset fraud and co-conspiracy. From here on, this isn't just civil." I leaned back and felt a weight lift off my ribs by a few inches. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me," he replied. "You saved yourself. I only put the right papers in the right hands." I set the phone down and looked out at the porch. The ocean lay quiet, the sky that rare kind of blue. The phone rang again, the same unknown number. I answered this time. Veronica's voice was tight with tears. "Eleanor, please hear me. We're in trouble. The lawyer is too expensive and the DA is involved. Jessica, please meet with us so we can return things, so we can apologize." I looked at the apron now, dry folds, crisp. "You may bring everything you took back here," I said slowly. "Come alone. No filming. No more lies. We'll talk after the items are laid on the table." Silence for a few seconds. "I'll come," Veronica said, small. I hung up, opened my notebook, and added a line at the bottom of the page: "Appointment returns." I didn't know what that meeting would bring beyond the cold shine of metal spread on my wooden table, but at least one more line could be crossed off. I closed the book and stepped onto the porch, letting the sea wind smooth the creases from my brow. Evening gathered. The lights inside rose to a soft, honeyed gold. I knew the story was about to turn toward apologies, belated calculations, and a choice I alone could make: shut the door tight or leave it slightly ajar. May bot dich Jun Noi, Saturday evening, the return. By late Saturday, the sea shifted colors quickly, jade green deepening into violet at the horizon. I set the teapot on the wooden table, pulled out a chair across from me, and switched on a small lamp. The doorbell chimed softly. Veronica stood there, no makeup, hair tied hastily, arms clutching a paper bag. She met my eyes for a second, then lowered hers. "I came alone," she said, as if to reassure herself. I tilted my head. "Come in." She set the bag on the table. Inside was a red velvet pouch. When she opened it, a cold gleam shot toward the ceiling. My mother's pearl earrings, a small gold watch, a few silver coins, a delicate chain. "They're all here," she exhaled. "I'm sorry." I didn't touch them at once. I opened my notebook, flipped to the page marked "Stolen Jewelry," and read each line, matching each item. "Not complete," I said. There was also a silver bracelet with floral etching and 2 1922 silver dollars. For a moment, Veronica's brows drew tight, then she dropped her gaze. "At my mother's house. I'll bring those." She sat, fingers laced nails pressing lightly into her palms. "Eleanor, could you drop the criminal case? We were wrong, truly. The lawyer costs. We're barely holding on." I poured tea, slid a cup toward her. "The criminal side," I said slowly, "isn't mine to withdraw. The prosecutor decides. All I can do is tell the truth when they ask how much it hurt, what was lost." Veronica lifted the cup but didn't drink. "Jessica. She was the one who pushed it all. I only went along." The phrase "went along" fell on the table like a crumb, innocent yet unsettling. I glanced at the open velvet pouch, its mouth gaping like a wound. "Bringing the items back was right," I said, "but not enough to speak of pardon or guilt. Tonight, I'll sign a receipt for these. The rest tomorrow, before 10. She nodded, chin trembling. "Do you have any paperwork with you?" I asked. She shook her head. "I didn't think of that." I went to the study, brought out a receipt template, and set it on the table. "Sign this. I, Veronica, acknowledge having taken these items from Mrs. Vance's house, and today returning them. I commit to delivering the remaining items before 10 a.m. on..." Sign and date. She gripped the pen, writing slowly, the strokes large but shaky. When she laid it down, she looked up. Can you not give this to the police? I folded the paper, slipped it into the file. I'll submit everything in order. Clear records are good for everyone. She stayed quiet. A gust rattled the window. In the corner, the LED of the new camera blinked steadily. I knew she saw it. I let her see. Veronica. I said, do you have children? She nodded quickly, eyes flickering. 2. Then you understand this feeling. I pointed to the gold watch. It isn't just metal. It's my mother's time resting in my hand. When you took it, you weren't just holding an object. You touched memory. Her throat worked. I know. I didn't think. That's the problem, I replied, voice steady. You didn't think because you assumed the old stay silent. Tonight I show you something the old can say no. A long silence. Then Veronica pushed the cup forward. I'll bring the rest. And Jessica wants to see you. My eyes narrowed. For what? To apologize and ask you to withdraw. The last words dropped barely above a whisper. I'll listen, I said once everything is returned. Withdrawing isn't mine to grant. But I do hold one thing, boundaries. We'll talk here. Doors open in daylight. No cameras, no money talk. Only truth. Veronica nodded hard, like someone catching a rope. She stood, cradled the empty paper bag, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back, voice small. Thank you for pouring tea. Thank you for bringing them, I replied. When the door shut, I gathered the jewelry into its box, locked it, and released a long breath. I signed the receipt, snapped a photo, and sent it to Thomas with a note, partial return. He answered briefly, good, keep procedure. Inside, the late light fractured into golden shards across the floorboards. I stored the box in the locked cabinet, then reopened my notebook and drew a line, jewelry partially returned. Beneath it, I wrote, tomorrow, await remainder. And below that, a line to myself. Strength is not shouting, but keeping what you said. That night, I slept easier. Perhaps because the ticking of a gold watch had returned, even if it rested silent in a box. Time, at least, had clicked back into its rightful place. Thomas's message arrived while I was rehanging the curtains. The doctor who signed the papers has been temporarily suspended. The prosecutor's office has opened a case for asset fraud and conspiracy. Prepare for a full deposition. I set the ladder down, sat on the step, and let the sweat cool on the back of my neck. Justice was beginning to take shape, to have sound to come with appointments. And of course, with invoices. The deposition took place in a room lit by harsh white lights, with a plain wooden table and a recorder flashing its red dot. The prosecutor asked in order of time what hour I arrived at the house, who I saw, what I heard, what I photographed, what I removed. I recounted each detail as if I were reading a technical drawing of a complex dress, the position of the seams, the curve of the hem, the spacing between stitches. My words were so precise, I surprised myself. At this age, I could still rebuild the structure of a day by holding on to the smallest objects, a rolling beer can, a smear of grease, an eye that was half defiant, half afraid. They asked about family. I did not flinch. I love my son. That love is not blind. The prosecutor nodded without judgment. He only took notes, then asked, what outcome do you want? I answered, I want the truth to be called by its right name and the boundaries to be respected. I was not exacting revenge. I was giving things back their proper names. Afterward, Thomas and I stopped at a small cafe. He ordered black coffee, I ordered tea. You'll be tired, he said. Tired is right. Justice burns energy. But trust me, at this stage, the wheel rolls on its own. I smiled. And the invoices, he shrugged. We'll keep our fee as agreed. But you will have other costs. Repairs, replacements, time. The price of protecting a home is always higher than people think. That afternoon, I opened my mailbox. Among the envelopes was a flyer from the community center supporting seniors against financial abuse. I touched the bold words financial abuse and felt how sharp, how accurate they were. For years, I had used soft words understanding sacrifice for the children. Today, the hard words had arrived exactly where they belonged. The next day, a strange number called. Eleanor, I'm a reporter from the local paper. We've heard the court will hear a case of elder home invasion in Malibu. Would you like to share to raise awareness? I paused. Thomas had said the story could be made public. I didn't want to expose my family. I wanted to warn others. I'm willing to speak about rights and protection, not about names, I replied. The short interview was filmed on my porch, the ocean as backdrop, where I spoke 4 sentences each, like a Stitch Locks paperwork witness's lawyer. I closed with older people are not weak. Do not mistake us. That evening, Veronica texted, we've hired a new lawyer. They say the fines could be heavy. Jessica has submitted a written admission of guilt. Please, if you can, don't push Robert to the edge. I stared at the screen for a while, then replied, I'm not pushing anyone. I'm standing on the boundary. Whoever crosses it makes their own choice. The next day, I received the repair estimates, reglazing the bathtub, refinishing the tabletop, repainting the doorframe, replacing 2 wicker chairs. The total was enough to make anyone swallow hard. I took my pen and signed. A house is not kept by moral lessons. It is kept by locks, invoices, and an owner who refuses to give up. Midweek, Thomas informed me. The prosecutor is considering a plea deal. No jail if they accept. But there will be fines, community service, and probation. Do you want to oppose it? I closed my eyes, picturing Robert's face when he held the summons. I didn't want to see him in prison. I wanted to see him learn. I won't oppose, I said. But I want my conditions in the record. They may not enter my home, use my name, or call me at midnight to negotiate. And I will not pay a cent of their penalties. Late that night, I sat calculating the costs: cleaning locks, cameras, repairs, legal fees, effort, lost sleep. At the bottom, I wrote one line: expensive but not negotiable. Some prices are never bargained like the price of keeping one's dignity. At the weekend, I visited the community center. The coordinator, a short-haired woman with bright eyes, handed me flyers, recognizing the signs of financial abuse. I shared my story. No names, no addresses, just methods. When I finished, an elderly woman clutching a cloth bag slowly raised her hand. I thought it was only me. I smiled, my eyes suddenly stinging. No, we are more than we think. On my way out, I signed up as a volunteer for the hotline. I knew sewing, and now perhaps I had learned another skill: stitching together the invisible tears in others' hearts. When I returned home, the sunset laid a warm, thin coat across the wooden floor. I placed my hand on the porch column and felt my arms stronger than the week before. Justice was worth the money, the time, the sweat. If anyone asked whether I regretted pushing the story this far, I would answer, no. My only regret is waiting so long to learn how to say, enough. Robert texted first, not called. Will you be home this afternoon? I want to talk about family. Those words about family are often the cloth draped over a negotiation. I replied, 4 o'clock. On the porch. Door open. He arrived on time alone. Thinner tie loosened his eyes, carrying the dull sparkle of lost sleep. He stood on the step, not crossing further, as if afraid to touch the invisible line. Mom, he said. I'm sorry. I nodded and pointed to a chair. We sat across from each other, the polished wooden table between us. I know the prosecutor offered a deal, he began. I'll accept. But, could you? I raised my hand. Don't ask me what isn't in my power. Speak what is in yours. He was quiet, then sighed. You're right. I came to say, I was wrong out of pride. I couldn't stand the thought of taking your money again. I wanted to be the man who provides. And I let that pride turn into stupidity. I listened. When you were little, I said I saved you so often you thought life was a sewing shop with me at the machine all night. You got so used to that safety net you hated it because it reminded you that you owed. And you chose to pay that debt by erasing me from the equation. Robert lowered his head. I didn't have the courage to say, I need help. It was easier to sign a paper pretending you weren't competent. He gave a crooked laugh. It sounds insane, but at the time, it felt logical. I didn't console him. I only laid one sentence on the table sharp as scissors. You chose pride over truth. He nodded without resistance. I came to ask, would you know? Will you let us bring the kids to see you? Not now. After it's over. I don't want them to grow up with only one version of the story. I looked into my son's eyes. I saw something new he was asking, not for himself, but for his children. That is in my hands, I said. With 3 conditions. 1, no one mentions court in front of them. 2, no one touches keys or rooms unless invited. 3, every visit is scheduled, never sudden. He nodded as if given a rung on a ladder. And the repairs, your legal fees. I cut him off. I won't take your money for this. Not because I'm rich, because I want you to understand the price must be paid and it cannot be transferred. You'll pay your part to the law. I'll pay mine, keeping the house, keeping my honor. Each pays their own invoice. We fell silent. The wind rocked the shadows of palm fronds back and forth across the tiles. Tomorrow, I continued, I'll see the will attorney. Robert looked up, his face tightening. You mean? I mean I'll set things in order. Not as punishment, I said slowly, but as order. This house will go to an organization that will use it rightly if by the time I'm gone, you haven't learned this lesson. If you have, the door remains open, but not because you're my son, only because you're worthy. I watched the words move across his face like a cold wind. He nodded slowly. I understand. He looked out at the ocean. Do you still want me to call you Mom? I sighed. That word is not a pardon. Say it if you know who you're calling. I'm calling you Mom, he said softly, and I want to be worthy again. We stood almost at the same moment. I walked 2 steps ahead, opened the glass door, and the clean scent of wood and yesterday's tea rushed out. You may come in, I said, but only to the kitchen door. Drink a cup with me, then go. The first step to being worthy is knowing where to stop. He smiled faintly, the first smile not twisted. In the kitchen, I poured tea into 2 old cups. Robert touched the rim and inhaled the steam as if returning to a backyard after rain. I have one last question, he said. Will you ever forgive me? I looked into the dark surface of the tea where our reflections merged for a second. Forgiveness, I answered, is not a verdict. It is a work schedule. You do a little each day. Today we've done the first part, drink tea without lies. He nodded, clinked his cup gently against mine. When he left, I walked him to the step. He turned back. Thank you for opening the door exactly this far. Get used to stopping here, I said. The rest belongs to time. He walked down the slope, his stride calmer than when he came. I went back inside and laid the envelope marked will on the table. That afternoon, I would go to the notary's office. I had already written a few new names: a shelter for women, a scholarship fund for young seamstresses. I was not closing the door forever on my son. I was simply opening another for those who would thank this house in the way it deserved. Before leaving, I stood on the porch, gazing at the sea. The wind carved fine lines across the water like stitches running straight over fabric. I smiled. Pride is a fabric that tears easily if pulled too hard. Truth is a thread that lasts when stitched right. Today, I chose the thread. A week after my talk with Robert, I went to the notary's office. The room was bright and smelled of fresh ink. I set the envelope with my will on the wooden desk and drew a breath, the way you do before cutting an expensive piece of fabric. The first stroke of the shears always decides the final drape. The notary read each new clause slowly, The beach house, if the day comes when I close my eyes and there is still no true reconciliation between my son and me, will pass to a women's shelter. A small sum will endow a scholarship for seamstresses. The remainder will be divided among a few organizations I trust. I kept one note open. If a direct heir proves change through consistent actions over time, I reserve the right to amend. I wanted to leave a little seam allowance in case the needle truly comes back around. Back home, I hired a part-time houseminder. Maria, middle-aged, steady hands, warm, smiling eyes, lives in the neighborhood behind the hill. 3 days a week I said cleaning, watering, monitoring the cameras when I'm away. Maria nodded, her quiet voice clear. A beautiful house needs the presence of people. I'll keep its human warmth. I handed over a key, the third set labeled Maria, and felt a relief so sharp it almost hurt. Sometimes peace comes from one more decent person moving through the rooms, not from trying to hold every lock alone. Right at the weekend, Robert texted Mom. "May I bring the kids by for an hour? We won't come in far." "I'll stay outside," I replied. 3 o'clock on the porch. No court talk in front of them. The bell rang on time. Sophia carried a small basket. Her little brother held a seedling wrapped in newspaper. "For you, Grandma." Sophia said, her voice soft and nervous. "Tomato plant?" the boy added. "Dad says you like to grow things." I smiled, the first smile in a long while that didn't need effort. "Thank you. Let's plant it now." We went to the back garden. Late sun sifted through the leaves, polka-dotting the dirt. I pointed to an empty row. "Here gets enough sun. Tomatoes need sun and a small fence to break the wind." Sophia knelt and pushed soil up with slim fingers. Her brother Ben tilted a tiny watering can as carefully as pouring milk. Grandma Sophia suddenly looked up, eyes wide. "Why did you and Dad fight so much?" The question sprouted like a seed, pushing from its shell, tender and determined. I went down on one knee, eye level with them. "Because grown-ups sometimes forget to ask before taking what isn't theirs," I said. "And because grown-ups sometimes think a lie can fix a wrong." "This house," Ben whispered. "Yes," I nodded. "This house." Sophia pressed the roots down and stared a long moment. "Mom says you were very cruel." I smiled, sad. "I ask people to respect boundaries and to take responsibility for what they do. Sometimes people call fairness cruel when it doesn't stand on their side." Sophia was quiet, then nodded the way a child does when something lands. "Like when I took my brother's crayons without asking," she said. "I got mad when he told on me, but I was the one at fault." "Exactly," I said, my heart softening. "One more thing," I added, straightening the plant. "Tomatoes need stakes. Without them, the plant collapses when the fruit gets heavy. Boundaries are like stakes, they keep you from toppling when life hangs heavy things on you." We set 3 thin bamboo stakes, tied soft twine, and watered. Sophia stood, brushed dirt from her knees, eyes bright. "So you will forgive Dad?" I looked toward the slope where Robert stood at a distance, hands in his pockets, watching and not intruding. "Forgiveness is daily work, like watering," I said. Today, I watered a little. While the children sliced fruit on the porch, Maria came by with the local magazine. "Your article," she said. A small feature in the center spread, "Protecting Seniors from Financial Abuse." They used a photo of an old hand holding a ring of keys, no face. The short lines I'd spoken were on the page, locks, paperwork, witnesses, lawyer. Sophia skimmed and squinted. "Are you famous now?" I laughed. "No, I just spoke a little louder so others could hear." Ben thought it over. "Then your tomato plant will be famous too. If it fruits well," I said, "it'll be famous in the kitchen." Before they left, Sophia slipped a scrap of paper into my hand. "I drew your porch," she said. I looked, tentative pencil lines, a roof, 2 rattan chairs, the blue sea behind, and 3 little tomato plants with stakes. In the corner, a wobbly line read, "Grandma's house." My eyes stung, but I kept them dry. "Thank you," I said, and hugged them both. Not too tight, not too long. Boundaries, even in hugs, must be just right. Robert rose as the children ran down the slope. I didn't invite him onto the porch. He stopped below the steps, lifted a hand, voice low. Thank you. I nodded. Next time, be on time, I said, and bring soft plant ties. He nodded like a man receiving homework and left. That evening, I opened the jewelry box and checked again. Everything was back in place, quiet as old stars. I locked it, set the key in the smallest compartment of the cupboard where no one would see without knowing to look. A message came from an unknown number. Thank you for volunteering. Your first hotline shift is next Wednesday. I replied, agreed. The thought of strangers' voices in the night straightened my back. Perhaps sewing and listening aren't so different. Both require patience. Both begin with finding the end of the thread. The next morning, the repairman came to reglaze the tub. I watched with my arms folded, the way you watch someone mend a chipped tooth. The tools, dry wine, the sharp chemical smell, the old enamel lifting in thin sheets. You have to go in even circles, he said, or it'll be lumpy. I smiled. Like a life. He didn't quite understand, but nodded politely. At noon, I brought baked goods to the neighbor who'd checked in earlier. She opened the door, eyes bright. I read your piece. My husband read it aloud at dinner. We stood in the doorway talking about boundaries, keys, and the hard words women often avoid. Before I left, she said, if you ever get tired, just knock. I nodded, and for the first time, the hill up to my house didn't feel so long. In the afternoon, I checked the camera app on my phone. 3 green dots steady. I named each view, green gate, porch, hallway, garage. Now and then, the wind flipped a branch and the system buzzed an alert. I chuckled. Don't alarm for wind, I typed into my notes. Alarm for people. Late in the evening, an email from Thomas, case progressing. Plea offer now formal. Fines, community service, 2 years probation. Fake medical report voided. Your file annotated, lucid, self-managing. I exhaled a long breath, like loosening a tight knot. No prison. Responsibility. Fines. Records. Enough to last longer in memory than an apology. I shut the laptop and stepped onto the porch. The 3 little tomato plants, freshly watered, shone in the porch light, their bamboo stakes clean and straight. In one corner, the geranium bed had decided to grow again, red petals thick and soft. I set a chair and watched the sea. The water had gone dark, but the sound was that of a sturdy sewing machine needle rising and falling without hurry. I suddenly thought of my mother, who taught me to sew my first zipper, who placed her best shears in my hand and said, cut clean, but leave a little extra in case you need to fix it. Maybe forgiveness is like that, cut clearly, but leave a small seam for tomorrow. I ran my palm along the edge of the rattan chair and smiled. That night, I added to my notebook. Leave the door open just enough for wind to enter, for children to laugh, for adults to amend themselves. Not so wide that someone slips in. Not so tight that the heart shrinks. I closed the book, switched off the light, and let the house drift into a thin, peaceful sleep. Tomorrow I'll call the scholarship fund to ask about the process and send Sophia a photo of the tomato plants. I'll tell her today they're standing a little straighter. And if Robert texts, I'll answer with the now familiar line, be on time and bring soft ties. We will do this day by day, like watering. On Sunday afternoon, as the sunlight slanted into thin slices across the porch, Robert appeared at the foot of the slope. No suit, no tie, just a gray t-shirt, dark jeans, and shoes with worn heels. In his hand was a coil of green plant twine and a small cardboard box. He stopped at the first step, set the coil down as though making an offering, and looked up. On time. Brought soft ties. I nodded. Good. What else today? He lifted the box. Some old photos I found in the storage room. I thought you might want them. I opened it. The loose photos smelled faintly of damp paper, Robert grinning toothless on the beach, me hair still black with my arm around him, my husband standing behind his shadow stretching across the sand. I paused. Robert didn't intrude on that moment. He simply stood still, letting me place the photos on the table as though setting bricks back where they belonged. "The court is over," he said quietly. "Fine community service, 2 years probation. Next week, I start cleaning trash off the beach." He gave a crooked smile, fitting since I once dirtied another beach. I didn't return the smile. I only pointed at the chair. "Sit. Tea. Then tie the tomatoes." We drank in silence. The tea cooled slowly like a gentle kind of time. Robert set down his cup, fingers interlaced. "I'm not here to ask you to change the will. I'm not here to ask you to speak softly to the prosecutor. I came to ask for a schedule for trust." He looked straight at me, not away, for the first time in months. "Once a week. I come to the porch, never past the kitchen door, sit for 15 minutes. I bring what you need, twine, nails, soil, whatever Maria says. If you're busy, I leave. No calls, no pleading." I leaned back in my chair. His proposal sounded like a shift schedule. "All right," I said, "but with a condition: each week you send me one line about what you learned from community service. Not what you did, but what you learned. Learning where trash comes from, or who picked it up with you, that's enough. And absolutely no lies." He nodded, no bargaining. I handed him the coil. "To the garden." At the tomato row, Robert bent down, measuring each length, tying loosely so the stems wouldn't scrape. Slow, careful, unrushed motions. I stood beside him, pointing to where the twine rubbed a leaf. "One more loop here." He obeyed. When finished, he looked up, sweat on his temple. "I'm sorry I made Grandma cry. Sorry I made you have to learn the language of official seals." His voice dropped on the word mother, as if lowering the lid of something precious. "No one needs to hear you apologize many times," I said. "People need to see you act differently many times." I stepped over to the geraniums, pulling a few weeds. "Act differently," I pressed, means keeping every small boundary until it becomes habit, like tying twine that doesn't strangle. "Yes, ma'am." On the way back to the porch, he stopped by the wooden table, still bearing the long scratch I hadn't sanded away. "Could I smooth this? I know how to use sandpaper." I looked at the scar, a relic of chaos. "Not today," I said. "Leave it a while. Scratches remind us a table was once misused. When I see it as only wood, not a wound, then you may sand it." Robert accepted without protest. Before leaving, he turned. "I'll be working afternoons on the South Beach. If you're free, you can pass by." "No need to talk." I nodded. "Maybe." He went down the slope, shoulders less hunched. I lifted the photo box onto a shelf, leaving Robert's gap-toothed smile in plain sight. At my age, I don't punish by erasing pictures. I simply rearrange the album so the faces fall back in line. That evening, I took a volunteer shift at the hotline. The third call was a middle-aged man describing a convenient way to transfer his house title to avoid trouble. I asked the question I wished someone had asked Robert early on. Whose trouble are you really trying to avoid, and where does it come from? There was silence, then a hoarse voice. I guided him to the small steps, locks, papers, lawyer. When I hung up, my hand no longer trembled like the first shift. Perhaps when you mend enough tears, the needle learns its own way. A month passed in the rhythm of tomato ties, and Robert's short lessons, learned messages, met an old man who picked trash because he missed his wife, learned the difference between party trash and the trash of someone living alone, learned how to sort bottle caps. Brief lines, but steady. By the 4th week, Maria asked Robert to help carry a soil bin. He asked me with his eyes before touching it. I nodded. Small gestures like stitches in the right direction. At month's end, I called Thomas. "I want to ask," I said, "about making this house a temporary space for women in the off-season when I'm away." He chuckled into the phone. Do it. The best real estate is the kind put to its right use. I set the phone down, imagining a small brass plaque on the porch. A room for those who need a new beginning. This house, once guarded by locks, could now guard others by a door opened just right. That afternoon, Robert came by, not entering. He stood at the step, leaving a small bag seed packets, a notebook titled, "Recognizing Ocean Waste." "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I only know how to arrive on time." I checked my watch on time. I looked at the tomato vines properly tied. I looked at him at the right distance. "Keep going," I said. "Forgiveness isn't a miracle, it's a habit." He nodded, stepping back just far enough for the wind to pass between us. A year later, the tomatoes bore fruit. Sophia picked the first one, grinning until her eyes squinted. Ben held it in both hands as though cradling a trophy. Maria waved a cloth from the porch. On the new brass plaque, the words, "A room for those who need a new beginning," glowed in the afternoon sun. On days I was in Chicago, the small room sheltered others, a woman carrying her child away from a bad life, an old lady waiting while her son repaired a leaky roof, a young girl learning tailoring. They left little notes on the table. "Thank you for a house that smells of soap and the sea." I kept them in a box alongside family photos and the golden watch. Robert still came on time, bringing twine seeds, sometimes a story about someone at the dump. He didn't ask to shorten the distance. He simply walked the length we had agreed. Gradually, the space shrank on its own, not by demand, but because sometimes the wind shifts in your favor. I haven't changed the will. I've only added one penciled line, "Under review." Forgiveness, as I've said, is a work schedule. The house once called a waste was now busy in the best sense. Wicker chairs occupied soup simmering in the kitchen, new hands tying vines in the garden. I no longer asked, "Why did they dare?" as often. Instead, I asked, "How can we keep others from thinking they can?" The answer remained 4 words: boundaries, papers, witnesses, community. And one more: love, not unconditional pardon, but patient teaching of how to tie without strangling. On a late summer evening, I sat on the porch, the sea flat as a sheet of blue cloth. My hand touched the wooden table, brushing the long scratch. It had faded, just wood now. Perhaps tomorrow I would sand it. The door stood open just enough. The waves kept their steady rhythm like an old sewing machine. And I, the 72-year-old woman once called a parasite, knew I had nothing left to prove. I only needed to keep working, watering plants, opening doors to the right degree, stitching back the tears of life one stitch at a time, straight, firm, unhurried. My house faced the sea, and so did I.